Right. Welcome, everyone. That's her, Her. Great new artist. Okay, let's begin. We're in our journey through the study of ethics, which is a journey that we take in Jewish calendar tradition every year between Passover and Shavuot. There's a tradition to study ethics, and in particular to study Mishnah Avot, the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the ancestors, during this time. And our approach this year, if you've been with us the last couple of sessions, has been to look at these ethical teachings from a mystical perspective, through the mystical commentaries of the Hasidic masters. So I just want to remind us that what we've seen. What does it mean to speak of mystical ethics? This is like sort of an odd phrase, and what's mystical about ethics anyway? Isn't ethics just like right and proper conduct? Mysticism, isn't that like about God or some other transcendent experience? So we've thought about that in previous sessions, and I think part of what we've seen so far is that the mystically oriented commentators, their focus is going to be not just on behavior, not just on what you do, but on consciousness, what goes on inside of you. So not just the right and wrong of what I actually carry out in the world, but also the right and wrong, the ought and should of how I ought to be looking inside myself, processing inside myself, right? Remember, ethics is not what you have to do, it's what you ought to do, right? Law is what you have to do, at least in our tradition, but I think we might speak, law is what you have to do, ethics is what you ought to do. So is there a way that you ought to be not just behaving, but also feeling, thinking, orienting yourself internally? So the first session we looked at Rabbi Nachman, who was really concerned with our self-image and encourage us to look for the good in ourselves. Always try to find the good in yourself. So your sense of self, right, is the concern. And how does one regard oneself? How can one try to regard oneself? And in some ways there was a similar consideration last week when we looked at the Baal HaTanya, although his advice seemed to be different. It was more like don't get too caught up in regard yourself perhaps as lacking and not necessarily as having goodness. So how do I think of myself? How do I feel? How do I look out through these eyes into the world? What's going on inside this head and this heart? Okay, so that's like a mystic, just by way of getting us into this. We're looking at ethics, but we're looking at almost like the ethics of consciousness. That I think is a kind of one way of thinking about a mystical ethics. And then I want to also signal, because because it'll be relevant today, that it isn't just any old mystics that we're looking at, but the Hasidic masters who emerged in the 18th century and their particular spin on mysticism. And it'll be important for us to remember that we're talking about this movement, the Hasidic movement, because we're gonna see today, I think, some of their particular concerns that have to do with their time and how and where they emerged into Jewish culture. Because today we are going to be we're sort of following one thinker each time. We looked at Rabbi Nachman. We looked at the founder of Chabad, Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi. But today we're going all the way back, and we're going to look at the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidut. Okay, we counted the 29th day of the Omer last night. So we're more than halfway on this 50-day journey. And that's I guess all the rambling I need to do up front. Let's say a blessing. I feel myself, I just like came from a meeting. I feel myself a little distracted, right? And that's actually going to be our topic today, focus and distraction. So I feel distracted. I don't know if anyone else does, but let's use this blessing as a way of kind of bringing us into this space, losing a little bit the world outside and being able to focus on our texts, on our tradition, but on each other and our voices. Let's try to get present. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so here's what we're going to do, as we have been doing. We're going to take a look first at one of the Mishnayot, one of the teachings from the Mishnah. The Mishnah is rabbinic teaching, and when I say rabbinic, I mean the original rabbis. Like we're talking, first, second century teachings here, all the way back. We're going to take a look at the rabbis and a kind of an ethical statement of theirs, and then we'll go and see what the Baal Shem Tov does with it. And the piece that we're going to look at today, I dare say, is you're not going to like, or at least it's going to be a challenging piece, okay? And don't. All I can say is, well, let's process it a little bit, but don't worry, we're gonna end up turning it on its head eventually. But let's take a look. I'm going to give you a source sheet for us to look through today. And the first Mishnah, this is our third class, so we're in the third chapter of the Mishnah. And what we're going to look at is Mishnah 7 here. Now, take a look at this. Rabbi Shimon said, there's lots of Rabbi Shimons, by the way. I think I misidentified one of them last class. There's lots of Rabbi Shimons, so it's a little confusing. But Rabbi Shimon said, one who walks down a path and is studying. Okay, so very rabbinic setting here. You're walking down the road, but you're also talking through some idea in the Torah or in the Talmud, or or in Jewish law. You're walking down the road and you're studying something to yourself, or maybe just with someone else. But you're walking down the road and studying, and breaks off from their study and says, so they stop studying in order to say, "Oh, mana e ilanze." How lovely is this tree? What a beautiful tree. Or mana en nirze. How lovely is this hill? So if you do that, if you're walking down the road studying and suddenly you see a beautiful view, a beautiful tree, a beautiful hill, and you stop and you say, oh, what a beautiful tree, then Scripture considers it as if they had forfeited their life. Now, this is a difficult phrase, actually. Scripture, hakatuv, that which is written, male alav, puts on him. So Scripture puts it on you, ki'ilu, as if you had become mitchayev, if you had forfeited your life. In other words, basically, if you do this, you deserve to die, according to Scripture. Now, that's a weird, I hope you already are a little rattled by this, but also it doesn't really make sense. Like, well, what's Scripture? Where, yeah, okay, so we're going to get into that. But what's the, can someone just speak out? What's the teaching here? You're walking down the road and you see a beautiful, I wanted to review the Talmud in Sanhedrin and then the laws of financial matters, and oh my gosh, what a beautiful tree. Then what? Like, somebody speak it out in plain English for me. Somebody have a hold of, like, what's the teaching here?
That absolute concentration is required, and if you break off, because you were studying Torah, if you break off the concentration, that's a sin.
Good. Okay, good. That's nice. Thank you. Richard often does this helpful beginning. Just give us the basic understanding here of the text. And I think that's right. You're studying Torah. Torah requires concentration. And so don't let yourself get distracted. And if you do and here's where things get harsh and kind of difficult to understand. And if you do break your concentration, then you deserve to die? Like, why? Is it this overreaction? What how do we understand this?
It's like these are two different worlds, the world of the Torah, the world of scripture, the study, and the everyday material world. So you're either in this world, and if you step out of this world to the everyday material world, then there's something wrong with that.
Okay. So Richard at first just speaking about concentration. Concentration is required when you're studying Torah, so don't break your concentration. Marianka, though, sees builds on that and sees a kind of a tension between the world and Torah, right? Spiritual matters and, I don't know, the outside world. And those realms are in tension. And actually, it isn't just a lesson about keeping your good focus and concentration, but actually the lesson is Torah is important. It's more important than whatever is out there. And so, and I think this is a nice reading that Marianka gave us. Of course, the Torah, scripture is on the side of scripture, right? Torah wants you to love Torah, right? So the Torah says, don't look over out there at that tree. Look at me. Think of me. Don't get distracted. So it isn't just about concentration, but it's about two objects of attention, but really just two realms, two entirely different values in tension. One is Torah and one is beauty, the natural world, this tree, okay? And again, the teaching is don't get distracted by the natural world. Be in Torah, because Torah, Torah, okay? All right, let's keep going a little bit before we get into our Hasidic teaching. Elizabeth?
So I think we just learned, last week, the same Rabbi Shimon told us when you say the Shema, don't say it automatically, like really concentrate on what you're doing. But I think that was a much kinder sort of suggestion. And so it is consistent with what we're hearing today, concentrate. But I think the punitive aspect of this is very jarring. It's, we all struggle with being present. And you're walking and seeing the beauty of the world. I mean, isn't that as good as studying Torah? You're appreciating this beautiful tree and beautiful flowers and you're smelling, and that's what's enveloping you. So it seems very punitive. Okay,
beautiful. Elizabeth brings us right to the difficulty, because, okay, this is a strong statement, but it's a strong statement in favor of, or I should say, more to the point, like seemingly like in opposition to an experience that surely we admire and have appreciation for, the regard for the wonder and beauty of nature. Like Elizabeth says, it's already jarring to hear, "And you deserve to die." Like, whoa, that's a little too much. What are you throwing all that just because I wasn't able to keep my concentration? Oh, you really have to focus when you study. Okay, but it's not just, oh, you got to focus. It's also, don't get distracted by what seems to be nonsense, lesser things, unimportant things. Don't go focus. But the unimportant thing here is the beauty of a tree. Surely. Okay, so I want to just take Elizabeth's comments and turn them out to you. What do you think of this? Is this, what do you think of the way that this teaching seems to disregard the importance of the natural encounter in favor of the textual encounter, of the encounter with Torah, with revelation? Okay, do you like that? Anyone willing to sign on to this teaching so far? Matt Silverstein, are you? What do you think?
Well, not really, but I want to pretend for the moment, because sort of putting on my Talmudic hat, let me say, if something as simple as a tree will distract you, then what about the other things in life? Having to work, dealing with people, if a mere tree is distracting, then the rest of the life will absolutely take you away from Torah. So Now, I'm not saying I actually agree with this, but I'm going to put on that hat. This is saying the world is going to take you away. Yeah, a tree is simple and beautiful, but now there's the work you have to do, and you haven't, and you're hungry, and so yelled at you, and all of this is going to take you away from that which is real, which is Torah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that, Matt, because I think from the start here, we have a first choice in how to read this Mishnah. Is it a Mishnah about concentration? And the example of getting distracted by nature is it's an obvious example, but really the point, Matt says, is Torah requires full concentration. Be present in your learning, right? That's a message that Matt can appreciate. And okay, sure, this is not to say that Yosemite is not a beautiful place. It's just like that and any other thing that might take you away from your learning. Or are we reading this to say, you think Yosemite, the natural world, a tree, a sunset, that's beautiful? Nah, Torah. It's all about Torah. Okay, so those are they're very different modes of reading. And I'm curious how other people are making that choice. Jen.
I think Matt got first to a little bit of what I wanted to say, because I'm reading it the same way. I think that it is as if you have forfeited your life. We started by reading very punitive, like saying it's a sin, but I think as if is doing a lot of work there. It's not saying, well, if you look at a tree while you're studying, then you sin, there you go. It's saying there's some parallel there's something pulling you away from life if you move away from Torah, which I think lends to Matt's interpretation that what it's trying to say is not necessarily something about focus and concentration being lost and therefore being a sin. And I really hope not, because I have ADHD and I would just be sinning all the damn time. But that it's saying something about the fullness and the beauty of Torah. And that's a very, very different gist.
Okay, great. All right, so between Matt and Jen here, we're beginning to construct an ethic that I think maybe we all can start to have a little more sympathy for. It's the importance of full concentration when we come to the Torah, when we come to our connect. And I want to right away start thinking, what does Torah mean here? Is it intellectual life? Is it contact with God, with tradition, with Judaism, with obligate, right? So, but whatever it is, that requires our full attention. So be present for that, be fully present for that, even to the extent that you wouldn't notice a beautiful sunset, notice it a different time, okay? What I want to ask if this teaching is sitting well with you, or if you are appalled by it. And I can see Florine shaking her head, so I want to call on Florine for some reaction here.
As a teacher, I don't think looking at the beauty of a tree takes away from one's concentration in learning. Quite the opposite. I believe that often when we look at beauty or we become creative, we then transfer that creativity to a deeper focus, and then transfer it to whatever we're doing, writing, learning, whatever we're doing, and then we're deeper into the learning. So I think if he said, look at a girl on the path, maybe I would have thought differently. I don't know. But to use a tree as an example, I think that it's an incorrect understanding of the process of focusing and process of learning.
Great. Okay. I'd love to hear folks react to that, because Florine has given us a critique of the Mishnah, right? Not just an explanation, but a way of, Florine is uncomfortable with this teaching because looking at a beautiful tree it enhances your learning. Isn't the beginning of the Torah about the creation of the natural world?
Yeah.
So you're learning Torah and then you see, oh, indeed, isn't it a wondrous world? Right? This isn't like, and don't get distracted by your iPhone or by a hot lady or a guy that walks by you, right? Like, no. This is, don't even get distracted by the wonder of the natural world. That doesn't make sense to Florine. Surely the religious experience has to be capable of incorporating that experience, not excluding it. All right, I'll take a couple more comments and then we'll head into the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. Agnes?
I thought what Florian said was so beautiful, and I think that the Mishnah can support that insofar as the problem is not noticing the tree, it's saying what a beautiful tree. And I think it's almost like the problem is a failure of interpretation or a misreading of the tree. Instead of seeing the tree and saying a bracha, instead of seeing the tree and like thinking of this verse in Deuteronomy that talks about trees, you're saying, oh, what a beautiful tree. You're like seeing the tree as something separate from Torah. But if you notice the tree and see it in terms of Torah, then that seems totally okay according to the text of the Mishnah to me.
Ooh, I love that. Do you see what Agnes just did? Responding directly, indeed, to Florian's comments, Agnes suggests, yeah, there is a way to incorporate the wonder of the natural, to synthesize. Maybe this Mishnah is just teaching us not to see these as separate realms. Remember, the Mishnah says, breaks off from their study and looks over and sees the tree. It is a kind of like, oh, now I forgot about what I was doing. I'm distracted. I'm thinking about this. Actually, Agnes suggests you could do both at once, right? Florine wants us to do both at once, and Agnes says, yes, that's possible. But that requires concentration, so that when you do see a tree, you say, wow, yeah, God created that in the first chapter of the Torah. All right, it's all coming together. So that's a lovely synthesis there, one that I see Florine even signing on to, right? Florine's nodding. All right, let me take one more comment, then we'll head into the Baal Shem Tov. Andrea?
I kind of think when you try to do two things at once, you do forfeit your life. If you study Torah, study Torah. You know, sit in a place where you can concentrate. If you're walking in the woods, appreciate every single tree. And if you're flipping back and forth and not really in the moment, to borrow a word from another tradition, you are in a sense forfeiting life.
Oh, I love it. Another wonderful reading of this Mishnah. That is, maybe what the Mishnah is teaching us is not that it's bad to look at a tree. Actually, it would be bad to be looking at a tree and then say, oh, what did you say about the Torah? That also would be a distraction. The point is to be fully present in whatever encounter you're having. So when you're in Torah, you're in Torah, right? When you're in nature, you're in nature. Okay, that's also a beautiful reading. And Andrea tries to make some sense of the phrase, you forfeit your life, which just, I think to all of us feels like way overkill. Like, what is it? You deserve to die. But I think as Andrea reads it, it's more like you're not in your life. You're not in your life experience. You're sort of like, you're not present in the life experience you're having in this moment. Okay, so these readings that Agnes and Andrea have just given us they're great because they're kind of struggling with the jarring nature of this teaching and trying to resolve it by sort of shifting our reading a little bit, trying to read this a little different. Like maybe there's a message here that isn't obvious at first read, and what Andrea and Agnes are doing is stylistically exactly the kind of reading that we will find in the Hasidic tradition. And as we turn now to look at the Baal Shem Tov's interpretation of this Mishnah, we're going to see a similar kind of, but even more extreme than Agnes and Andrea, a similar kind of, don't read it like this. Actually, if you read it with a little twist, then it makes more sense. Then some of the extreme language will make more sense, or the contradictions between our basic values, and here I'm calling Torah a basic value and a beautiful tree a basic value. That the conflict maybe can be resolved if we read the Mishnah a little differently. Okay, so the Baal Shem Tov is going to, I think, push back against this Mishnah in the way that we have, but he's not going to head towards the place that I might have wanted him to. That is, he's not going to say the natural world is so beautiful, we have to love the trees. That's not going to be his message. He's going to take us to a different place. So let's start to get into it and take a look here at the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. So this is from a book called Keter Shem Tov. It it's a book that is put together by one of the chief disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov himself never wrote anything down. It's one of the great sort of features of this legend, is you have this guy that started a movement and we have no idea exactly what he really said. So this is just a collection of supposed purported teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, all given over in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, but by his students. And I must say, it's a difficult text. It's difficult because it's a mystical text. So it's taught in the language of kind of hints and allusions. Not everything is fully spoken out. So it's difficult in that sense. And it's also difficult because, as I just said, nobody was really totally sure what the Baal Shem Tov actually said. So a lot of these teachings are the best attempt to try and remember what his teaching was, okay? So a difficult text, and we'll try to move through it carefully and make sure we don't get lost along the way. But if something looks strange or missing to you, don't worry. That's the nature of the text. That's not your fault. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, he quotes whatever the compiler quotes the Baal Shem Tov as saying, one who walks alone down a path and is studying and breaks off from their study. Okay, now you can see there's already an oddity here, right? I see Dejas nodding, right? Now, what are you noticing, Dejas?
Now he's alone.
Right, exactly. So this alone is new. What is it? Where does this come from? And now, Safaria here in their notations, which actually are quite helpful, says, oh, well, this actually comes from from Mishnah 3, chapter 3, Mishnah 4, but in our version, it's chapter 3, Mishnah 7, right? Look, this looks like, wait, which one is it? But Dejas noticed that there's an extra word here, alone. And in fact, if you go to Mishnah 4, I included it down at the bottom here, there's a different Mishnah, and it seems like this is where that language comes from. Take a look at this Mishnah. Rabbi Hanina ben Hachinai said, one who stays awake at night or walks on the way alone, there's that alone, or turns one's heart to idle matters, behold, and same language, this one has forfeited their life. Mitchayev benafsho. Okay, so now that's interesting. And I honestly, folks, I don't know exactly what to do with it, because it seems like, let's scroll back up, right? There's the word alone, walking on the road and forfeiting your life, but that's not the teaching that the Baal Shem Tov is quoting. What he says is one who walks alone down a path and is studying and breaks off from their study. So that's our Mishnah. So I don't know, like this is, I told you this text is going to be difficult, and already I don't know, is this intentional? Is the Baal Shem Tov merging these two texts together, or did he have a different edition in front of him where the alone had gotten transposed? I don't know if this is a textual error or a little bit of a trick, like importing a word from another Mishnah that seems connected. I don't know. So I'll let you do with it as you will, but the word alone becomes significant. So maybe it is intentionally inserted, because this is how the Baal Shem Tov begins to explain the problem in our Mishnah. Okay, here's what he says. Okay, there is a difficulty here. Okay, there's a difficulty. We've got, like, when we look at our Mishnah, there are a couple of strange things, and we already were pointing some strange things. So first of all, he says, it ought to have just said breaks off from their study, and we would have known they were studying. Okay, this is classic Jewish, almost Talmudic language here. Like, you don't need more words than you need. So if there are extra words, we have to figure out why. So when it says someone is studying and breaks off from their study, they didn't have to say that. They could have just said one who is walking down a path and breaks off from their study. I think I have a typo here. Hold on. One who is walking down a path and is studying and breaks off from their study. We don't need this extra language of studying. Okay, it's sort of big deal, but okay, I guess this really sounds, like I said, almost Talmudic, right? Like, oh, why do you have this extra word? Okay, fine. I wasn't so concerned, but the Baal Shem Tov offers that as a problem. And here's another problem. And what's more, it says Scripture considers it as though they were liable for death, but it doesn't say which verse. What do you mean? It Scripture consider that very phrase is vague. What do you mean? The Torah consider, what is it? How does the Torah consider? Where does the Torah consider it? What scripture are you talking about? Right? Give me a verse or something. Okay, so these are a couple of problems that the Baal Shem Tov used to say there's something that doesn't quite make sense here. We've got to read this a little differently. And here is his first attempt at reading it differently. Okay. Okay, here he begins. Okay, it's possible, he says, to explain this as follows. One who walks down a path is the one who walks down the straight path. I'm not sure what the straight path is, derech hayashar, but it seems like you're walking down the right way. You're going the right way. You're doing the right thing. So one who walks down a path is the person who's going down the path, our path, the path of Torah, halacha, whatever. But even so, they are alone, which is to say that they are not attached to God. Okay, now this is not been easy so far. So in the next paragraph, I think we're going to see it crack open a little bit. But I want to just pause here and say, either is anything confusing, or does anyone already have a sense of what this might mean? What does it mean to say, think of this as someone who is going down the right road, but they're all alone. They're not connected to God. Okay, I'd love to let me just pause here in case there are any difficulties or insights into where we're at so far. Okay. I see that Dejas and Payam have hands up, but may not be for this exactly. So either of you want to jump in at this point? No? Okay, I'll hold. Anybody else care to explain or figure out where we're? Alexandra.
I sort of take issue with that. I think our tradition also has a lot of the prophets spent years and years and years alone. And there's in the desert, David was a shepherd. Like, a lot of the leaders spent years alone developing inner fortitude and traits like that to then take what they developed out into the world. So I do take issue with the idea that if one is alone, particularly in these times, that one is not with God. There are particular opportunities to connect with God in solitude that can be more challenging than in community.
Okay, great. Okay, so the language of alone here is a little, and it is a little, again, vague, and it's not entirely clear what it means in its original context, and then what exactly the Baal Shem Tov is doing with it. But let's just go back and look at where he got it from. Again, this word was imported from another Mishnah, and the other Mishnah seems to say if you walk on the way alone, you forfeited your life. So there's something wrong with being alone, being all alone, isolated. And Alexandra says, that doesn't make sense to me. Moses was a very alone figure. Eliyahu was a very alone figure. What is wrong with being alone? In fact, don't you think that you need to be alone sometimes in order to have divine encounter? Okay, so that's a good question. But going back into the Baal Shem Tov here, it seems like his interpretation of alone is a particular kind of aloneness, which is that the person is not attached to God. She'eno davuk be'Hashem yitbarach. So what does it mean to be alone? It means to be fundamentally alone. In other words, someone is walking down the right path, but they are not connected to God. And that is going to be the problem. He's about to, as I said, he's about to break that problem wide open. But any last kind of spin on this or thought before we move further? Matt, you want to?
Yeah, just a quick thing, because it seems to me that connects to the people who are saying, but you have to see the beauty. And I don't remember who said that, because that's, if you're separating yourself, you're alone. If you're cutting yourself off, and I think the Baal Shem Tov is actually going to be saying that if you're not going to see the beauty because you're separating, then you're also alone.
Good. Okay, excellent. So Matt hears in the word alone and the way the Baal Shem Tov is treating it, that there's something about alone, and maybe the Baal Shem Tov just took this word from another mission and stuck it in because he really felt like it belonged here. Because there's for him, there's something about the state of aloneness. We should hear a kind of a, like there's a kind of a clue there that what it means is you've isolated yourself. You've cut yourself off. You're all alone. And that's not good. Alexandra's pushback notwithstanding, and it's good pushback. What do you mean? It can be good to be alone. But in this rendering, being alone is like cutting yourself off. So Matt wonders, what exactly are you cutting yourself off from? We could read it back into our Mishnah, like you cut yourself off from the Torah, or you cut yourself off from the tree, or you cut yourself off from God, says the Baal Shem Tov. Okay. Now, I told you it's a difficult text, and we're like seeing like words that come from other Mishnayot, and he offers this sort of he gave us a couple of problems. Did we think they were problems? But he had some problems with the text. And then he presents us with this kind of overarching statement. It's someone walking down the right path, but somehow detached from God. Okay, so that's where he's headed, but none of it is clear yet. And I keep saying this, and I hope it's true. In this next paragraph, this is really where the core teaching is. So take a look at what he does, because again, like Agnes and Andrea's readings, this is going to be a little bit of a twisted reading of our Mishnah, right? Seeking a kind of a second layer of understanding. So let's take a look at what he does. So what he says is, okay, someone is walking down a path and is studying and breaks off from their study. Okay, that is to say, meaning, like, here's what this teaching really is about. And here, let me just space this up so that we can see it together in the same place. That is to say, they break, That is to say, they break themselves off from God because of their study. Because greatness and glory come to them because of their study, and they come to think that that's their own doing. Okay, let me just read this in the Hebrew, and then we'll go and look at we'll make sure we get this exactly right, because this is the core teaching. Vishoneh umafsik mimishnato, right, is studying and breaks off from their study. He wants to read that to mean they break off from their study, meaning as a result of their study. It is due to their study that they break off. Remember, he had this problem, like, why is it saying they study and then they break off from their study, right? So he's saying that doubling language is a way of telling you that what they're doing is they're walking down the road and they're studying and they're studying and they're studying and they're studying. And because of that study, they're cut off. They're cut off. Exactly as Matt was suggesting. And what are they cut off from? They're cutting off from God. And they're cutting off of God because of their study. Their study is cutting them off from God. Now, the second part is interesting too, although I think it's less essential. But he has an explanation for how that works, which is that studying Torah is amazing, and it brings you greatness and glory, and so there's something wonderful about studying. But when you're in that mode of studying and you're like, wow, I'm really studying deeply here, really getting these ideas, that what happens in that is you start to think, wow, I really know how to study Torah. I'm really a great Torah student. I'm really getting this. Okay, that's one version of how you get cut off from God. But the core teaching here, and with this, I want to turn it back out to you for some interpretation, is that he's saying the problem is that you're walking along the road and you're studying, and that's the distraction. Your studying is the thing that breaks you off. Okay, and just because it's a difficult text, I'm going to do that. I'm sorry to belabor this, but I'm just going to do it one more time in the original text, just so we see this is what you call a Hasidic reading, meaning a reading that like almost deliberately kind of finds a twist in the text. So one who is walking down a path and is studying and breaks off from their study and says how lovely, right? That sounds like you break off from studying, but the way that the Baal Shem Tov is reading it is, and you break off, you're cut off. Why are you breaking off? Because from your study. It's your study that does it. Okay, now, okay, that was belabored, I admit, but what's the point here? What is the Baal Shem Tov trying to teach us? What does he see as the problem? The problem is not what we thought it was, but a new problem. What's the problem? Okay, again, I want to see if Dejas or Payam wants to jump in here. Yeah, Dejas, please.
Yeah, the problem has to do with this self-consciousness and the splitting, the internal splitting that sees the world and the Torah as separate, or that sees the self. It's interesting also in the language of nafsho, right? That it's from the level of the nefesh, from the level of the blood, that which separates, that also becomes the only way in which to have the mysterious relationship with the one. So it's too simplistic of a way of orienting towards reality. And that, you know, that it's in the halacha, right? It's in the walking, in the process.
Good. Okay. So what I'm hearing is that your study can be can remove you from the world. And it does so if your study causes you to be immersed in nafsho, in your own self, in your own being, and not tuned in to the world around you. Okay? What the Baal Shem Tov says is not tuned into God, but I think in the context, it's also, you're not tuned into God, God's grandeur, the trees, the beauty. You're just like, you're deep in your study, and now you're cut off from everything else. That's the problem, which sounds like the exact opposite problem, right? All right, let's keep going. Payam, is this a good moment for you?
I mean, can I go back? I have a totally different Kabbalistic interpretation of this whole thing. Should I wait?
Okay. If it's relevant,
I'll wait then.
Okay, Allison, that was a great, that was a great display of strength, Payam, the strength that it takes to hold back. I salute you, Allison.
Hey, so I think I'm on topic, hopefully. I think what he's getting at is like that you can be broken off from God from studying. It's arrogance. It's that, one who's studying so much that maybe they get to the point where they think that they know everything, that they have the answers. Yeah. And that because of that, therefore, because having a connection with God requires like a humility.
Good. I think you're reading this exactly right, Allison. I mean, Dejas was already kind of pointing in this direction, and you're really giving it full language. The problem here is that you become so pleased with yourself and your studying. There's an ego problem here. Now, let's look at the next paragraph, because this really becomes clear in the next paragraph. But I have to say, I would have liked, and Dejas was already kind of like giving us some version. I would have liked the Baal Shem Tov to say, no, you have to be immersed in nature. Nature is so beautiful. Don't be cut off from nature. But that doesn't seem to be exactly where he goes. And especially so because I told you this text is like sort of like elliptical and confusing. So his continuing interpretation of the Mishnah actually in some ways, ignores the naturalistic element. Because look at what he does with the phrase, oh, what a lovely tree is this. Take a look at what he does here. He says, and that is, but this is really very much in the spirit of what Allison was saying. Breaks off from their study, you think that this is all you're doing, and then they say, how lovely is this tree? They say this referring to themselves. Okay, now I'm not sure, this is really a Hasidic reading in the sense that it's like, I don't think that's a great reading of how lovely is this tree. Like you have to buy into the fact that there's a deeper meaning to that. He gives us a proof text, which is that in the book of Deuteronomy, it does say, for is a person a tree of the field? Right? So there's some association that we are like the trees. Okay. So, but it very much echoes Allison's point, which is to say the deeper meaning is when someone says, oh my gosh, what a lovely tree, the Baal Shem Tov says, what they're really saying is they're studying. Now we're not even out in the world. Like you're studying and you stop and you say, wow, look at this tree. Look at this guy. Look at this studier. Look at this mind. Look at this Torah that's coming through this mouth. I mean, I am a great teacher, am I not? I am a great student. I am like the very redwood of Torah study. I'm the very oak tree of Torah study. I am the great tree of the Torah. Right? So that's one version. One version is, oh, look at how wonderful I am. And then he gives another possible proof text. And I know this is confusing, but I hope we're getting the gist of it in the midst of it. They also say, here's another reading of what a beautiful tree. From the book of Daniel, this tree has grown and become mighty. Ilana de Rabba v'takif. And I wouldn't have even known this, but the Sefaria has this helpful notation that says that in the Zohar, the mystical text of Judaism, the core mystical text, they say that this tree has grown and become mighty is a reference to the tree of life, that is the Torah. Okay? So two versions of what it might mean to say, what a lovely tree. But the point is, one version is, look at what a lovely learner I am, what a beautiful mind I have. And the other one is, what a great Torah this is. What a beautiful Torah. But either way, you're just so self-satisfied with your own self-intellectual learning. You're in that experience of just like, wow, it's such great ideas, such a good class, such brilliant things being said. But in the midst of that, you're just getting more and more into the grandeur of your own self. And that's the problem. And that's what cuts you off from God. And Torah and your study of Torah has the danger of doing that. Okay? Now, that's the opposite reading than the one we first had. Torah is something that can cut you off from where you should be focused. It seemed like you have to be focused on Torah. Don't let anything cut you off from Torah. He's saying, no. Be careful not to let Torah cut you off from what? From God? I mean, what exactly is he? What's the dynamic here? What is the thing that you can get immersed in that'll cut you off from the other thing? Like, how do we think of this tension that Torah can take you away from what other experience? Okay? Let me turn to Hannah and Jensen.
I'm just thinking about this constant fear of or aversion to isolation or soulness aside from God, right? God's allowed to be the only. The word yechidi, I was thinking about a lot of Talmud that I've learned about, like judgment, right? When there are judges that are set up, you can never judge alone, right? Only God is allowed to be alone in judgment. And I think that there's a fear that if we do too much Torah or too much anything really that makes us go too inward into self and ego, then we're forgetting we're not God. That's not our place. If you lose sight of the fact that you're just part of something bigger, which maybe Torah allows you to feel part of something bigger and to connect with God, maybe being in nature allows you to connect to something bigger and feel connected to God. Or maybe either of those things in some extreme takes you away from that into self. And as soon as you're in self and you're in ego and you're outside of how you are part of something much larger that you don't even understand, you're too close to trying to be what God is. And that's not the place for you. That's not right. And you have to be always aware that you're not that important. You're learning these things or you're exposed to these things for the sake of betterment and the sake of connection, but it's not about you. And don't get so high and mighty to think that it is, because that's very clearly not what your role is.
Okay, this is good. And I'd like to hear, Hannah gives us a great version of what it means to be too mired in the self. Because that does seem to be the concern here. Somehow through learning, you come to think it's all about you. Okay, and Hannah's version of that dilemma is that, yeah, like through the Torah, you start to think like, you're like the God. Like look at, I'm doing Torah, and substitute for Torah, you could put in the word religion. You could put in the word Judaism. You could put in the word tradition. But whatever word you use, those sort of an established tradition of study and religion and content, that has the potential, or does it, I ask you, has the potential to make you think that you're God, or that you're the point, or that you're grand, or that you're like, through religion itself, you lose the point of religion, which is that there's something else out there, and you get too focused on your internal experience here. Okay, so I'd love to hear other versions of this, or just other thoughts on that danger, the danger of Torah, Judaism, religion, tradition, whatever, becoming a kind of an isolating force that pulls you into self and out of God, the world, whatever that other touch point is. Okay, I see a new hand, Kate Silberstein.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi. Could it also, I'm just thinking about what she just said, could it also be that when you become so immersed in study, you're forgetting about charity and acts of loving kindness? That if you only do the study, are they cautioning us that if you only do the study, then you're forgetting the complete Pirkei Avot? Okay, that's great, Kate. Kate asks, takes us back a little bit and asks, wait, what, practically speaking, if you're so into study, what is it that you are distracted from? Is it God? Is it looking at trees? Or is it a whole host of other things? And I think that's a really important question because, and here we have to say something and say it out loud, because I think it's right at the heart of this, of the matter for Hasidic thought. Because it's important to remember, where and why does Hasidic Judaism emerge? It emerges in the 18th century in Eastern Europe, and it emerges as a reaction to, it's a populist movement, meaning we all, the simple Jew, we can all connect to God. And it emerges as a reaction to an elitist Talmudic yeshiva culture that has placed the entirety of the Jewish experience in the Beit Midrash, in the study of Torah, right? The Hasidim were revolutionaries, they were radicals, and they were excoriated by this other group, the Mitnagdim, their opposition. And that group, which is really the older group, was saying, you are turning Judaism into you sing, you dance, you go into but it's all about Torah, 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 Torah. So this isn't just a random kind of reframing of the Mishnah. This actually gets to the heart of what Hasidic Judaism was up to, which is that it arrived on the scene to say Judaism is not just a book religion. Judaism is not just for the intellectual elite. Judaism is not just found in a book. Judaism is something like Judaism, God, tradition. The whole point of life is something that everybody should have access to. The way that everybody can look at a tree. Okay, so there's something very historically pointed about these remarks. I just saw Noah Schechter had a hand up. And then you put it down. I want to hear from you, Noah. No? All right. Payam.
Yes, so I have a completely different Kabbalistic interpretation of this whole thing. I mean, to me, it refers to it's an allusion to the four rabbis who entered Pardes. And, when you're studying Kabbalah, it's like a hierarchical. You have to be X amount of years old, you have to be married, you have to have all of these different prerequisites before you can even start studying Kabbalah. And the reason for that is because people went mad, right? They're not ready to receive that. So, I mean, to me, it sounds like, you have to go through the path here, this hierarchical path. You're studying Torah, stay with that because you're not ready to receive the Torah of nature. I mean, it's not saying like the Torah of the book is more important than the Torah of nature, whatever. It's just different. And if you're not ready for that more powerful Torah, you're going to go insane. I mean, you're literally going to forfeit your life.
Interesting. Like, could he be talking here about different modes of Torah learning and the way, right? Okay, so that's interesting. The way that one mode of Torah learning can be overreaching. Like I'm trying to move beyond into some other Torah realm that, all right. Yeah, as you said, a different reading entirely of our text. Noah, you're back.
Yeah, sorry, Rabbi, you said a lot of what I had raised my hand to discuss, and but I do have this question. So like I keep coming back to forfeiting one's life, right? So what does that mean in this context? And to me, it suggests that if all if your focus is purely on study, and if you are breaking off from study, it's like you're missing out on all the other important Torah verbs that are, like Agnes was saying earlier, like making blessings over everything that isn't la'asok b'divrei Torah. Like, so that's, I think, maybe interesting, is that there's as you were saying, for all those reasons, the Baal Shem Tov and the Hasidic, like early Hasidic thinkers were like, maybe not just only yeshiva, like maybe we should be doing other things. And so my question is, just a second ago, as we were studying, I got a call from an old friend who I haven't seen in so long, and I ignored the call because we were in the middle of Torah study. And if my life is at stake here and I'm forfeiting, should I have signed off of this Zoom and have I just forfeited my life? Where, like, which one? What do you think?
Yeah. Good question. And the way you frame it, I think, also brings back some of Payam's reflection. Like, what are the different modes of studying Torah? And can a certain mode block you off from other modes, right? Like, is it somehow, there's other Torah out there. Is studying Torah cutting you off from the Torah of nature, the Torah of blessings, the Torah of prayer, the Torah of, aren't these other things Torah? And one way of reading this is to say, when you are so focused in the intellectual tradition of Judaism, you're cut off from God, meaning you're cut off from Torah, really, because Torah represents more than just the intellectual tradition. Now, having said that, we're out of time, but I want to just show you where that ends in the text, because I think you're right on to the destination that the Baal Shem Tov is taking us towards. And it is, as you intuit, it is a play on this language of being mitchayev b'nafsho, being like forfeiting one's nefesh, which can mean life, nefesh, but it can also mean self. So take a look at the way the Baal Shem Tov ends, and I think this also echoes something that Andrea was saying earlier. So that is why it says Scripture considers it. And this is exactly, I think, what Noah was just saying. That includes all the Torah, meaning the whole of the Torah is something much more than just your study. The whole of the tradition, the purpose of this whole path is to connect you to life and God and nature, and in other words, to direct you to the other, outside of yourself. But you forfeit that, you let go of that experience with your life, or in this case, self. In other words, here's another Hasidic reading. Instead of as if they had forfeited their life, he's reading it as, it is as if you forfeited everything with yourself, with your own self. You got too immersed in your own inner self experience, in the aggrandizing of yourself. And that experience, which you arrived at through Torah, which is supposed to be this wonderful, exquisite, revelation from God, but you used it to get to know yourself, to nasal gaze, to think you were great, to think your inner experience was the primary experience, and thereby, through yourself, you forfeited everything else. You cut yourself off from the entire world. And in that sense, right, the problem is that you're not looking at the tree. The problem is that you're not seeing the world outside. Because when you're disconnected from the tree, or from the poor person on the street, or from all of the other aspects of Torah that are not just the pure intellectual study aspect, then you're cut off from God. And cut off from God. Torah is supposed to connect you to the world, the other, the outside, to God, to nature, not to cut you off from it, okay? So that is a Hasidic rereading of a text, and I hope you feel the flavor of Hasidic reading. But in this case, as I said, a very pointed rereading. And I think the Baal Shem Tov isn't just saying this as some spiritual advice, but as a direct critique to the world of Talmudic elitists who are holed away in their study halls and completely cut off from the world around them. And you know what? That tradition of being cut off in the world, that may be one that was present even in the early rabbinic period, and that sort of filtered down and been embraced by these like Talmudic academies. But one of the things that Hasidic Judaism came to do was to break that model open, to suggest that that is actually that experience of intellectual religious intensity can actually cut you off from God and not amplify your religion, but actually diminish it. Okay, we're over time, so we'll end there. Thanks everybody for your thoughts. It's a very difficult text today, so I appreciate your patience and your keen reading today. See you all next week.